Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started in this very large room for our group here. Thank you for coming today. We're really excited about this first class in a series of 5 under a program called Colorado Coalition for Social Impact. And it is a partnership between the Better Business Bureau and the Small Business Development Center. And if you've been to other CCSI events, have you been to other CCSI events, everyone in this room? No, not yet. So we have one new person to the program. Thank you for coming. Under the program, there's a number of events that we do. We do quarterly roundtable sessions. We do CCSI orientation meetings, as well as this new series of workshops that we just launched. We are recording today, so this information will be available to others down the line on our YouTube channels and archived on the website that the Better Business Bureau hosts. Today, I am one of your presenters who will start off the class. My name is Ekta Markulier, the Executive Director of the Pikes Peak Small Business Development Center. And here with us today is Stacy Burns and Jonathan Liebert, who will also be coming up to introduce themselves momentarily when they start speaking as well on the age of the fourth sector, our workshop today. So with that said, the question is why now? Why did CCSI matter? Why did we bring this to the table? And why do we think we need to have these types of workshops? So the first thing, and the most important thing, is the SBDC and BBB, we work really closely together in our region and all through Southern Colorado and across the state, because we always want to make sure we're fulfilling the need of our small businesses. And we were getting a lot of questions about benefit corporations, social enterprises, corporate social responsibility, and all of the elements of social impact that Jonathan will be talking to you about later. So why now made sense, because we wanted to make sure we were educating our small businesses on the things that they needed to know about. So fundamentally, the Better Business Bureau on its own and the SBDC, we run a lot of great business workshops. Everything from QuickBooks to knowing what scams are out there and knowing your market and industry reporting. But when we joined forces together, we were able to bring a higher level of education, which we will talk about as well, which really takes our fundamentals and adds that twist for social enterprise and the extra things you need to know. So we combined our forces to recognize and support the age of the fourth sector. And what we wanted to do is create an avenue for discussion, and we do that with our roundtables, a framework for educating and mentoring. So this is the first of a series for our educational workshops. And then we're also making sure that we create the list of mentors to support that one-on-one discussion you need to support your business afterwards. And then also, we want to put our stake in the ground as those that are experts in this field. So we're doing that locally. It's already taken hold nationally and throughout the state. So we want to define social entrepreneur, and I found this really great quote, and so I thought I'd read it for you, because we want to be able to distinguish for you the difference between an entrepreneur, those of us that just get in business, but then the social entrepreneur. So the primary motivation for a traditional entrepreneur is more often than not a desire to make money. A social entrepreneur is driven more by a passion to solve a social problem, and only chooses to use business as a mechanism to solve these problems. I thought that was a really great way of defining what we're going to be talking to you about. So why does it matter to small business, and how is small business making an economic impact by looking at being social entrepreneurs? Why do we care? Well, small business can have even a bigger impact than small business already does in our community. So first, workforce development. Some of these items we're actually going to go into more detail, so I'm going to just give you kind of the bullet points of what we'll be talking about shortly. But what we've been seeing is that there's less employee turnover and more employees with passion for your company when there's a social aspect to your business and to your mission and how it's integrated from top to bottom in what you do. We need to recognize the change in the workforce, age, demographics. What we're seeing, and Jonathan, as I mentioned, we'll get into this a little bit more, is that there's a greater need for millennials and our younger workforce to work for companies that are having a social impact or have a social cause. They're not just looking for a job, they're looking to make more of a difference. SROI, there's a big social return on investment, and there's a big push right now through Stacy Burns and those that she's working with to really figure out how we can measure and monetize and figure out what is the real impact social enterprise will be having. The triple bottom line, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about what a triple bottom line is, but it's talked about in different ways. It's really, you have your financial, your revenue line, but then what's the other two? It's your social or your environmental impact, or as other people say, people, profit, and planet. Another 3 Ps that we can start teaching at the SBDC. And then economic vitality. Small business is the vitality of our economy. It creates culture, it creates diversity, and social enterprises are adding to that vitality of our region. And then how does small business create an impact by increasing their customer base? We need to move with the changing behavior of our customers. Also another point that we'll dive into a little bit deeper a little bit later, how the customer buying behavior is changing with social enterprises. So these are our objectives for today. This is what you're going to learn about. We're going to give you a good overview of this sector, the relevance of this sector, and the 4 things you need to know before starting a social impact business. And really these 4 things are the next 4 classes in the series. So choosing your legal entity, bookkeeping and finance, measuring your impact, and telling your story. And then the future of where we see the 4th sector going. So Jonathan, you are next.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So hello everybody, my name is Jonathan Lieber, as Ekta mentioned. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the Better Business Bureau of Southern Colorado. And this is, as Ekta mentioned, the first in a series of classes, and this is actually the first time we've done this class. So all of you are part of the first series of this. And as Ekta mentioned, this is what we wanted to make sure we're doing, is providing information and education to the community, because we're getting just a lot of questions about this. And quite frankly, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And not only is there a lot in the field, but it changes every day because it's so new, and there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of conversation, there's new materials that are happening all the time, new information popping up. So we wanted to make sure that we were providing some help for folks and providing some value. So this is, as Ekta mentioned, the first in this series, and we want to do more of these classes. But what I'm going to start to talk to you today about is just this whole notion of the 4th sector, because you've probably heard this mentioned before, this new sector, another sector of the economy. We were kind of referencing it here just today as this is the 4th sector. And that's really a placeholder for the name, because I think the name of what this will become, it will probably change. We're not quite there yet. But obviously when you talk about the other sectors of the economy, you have the private and the public, which everybody's familiar with. This used to be kind of called the nonprofit or the 3rd sector. Stanford came up with this other name for it. They call it the plural sector. And that's fairly recent, to kind of give way to this new notion of this 4th sector of the economy. And what I like to tell people about this in terms of why this is important and why this is relevant is that this is something that it's a hybrid between for-profits and non. It's another sector of the economy. And I think the significant point here is that you don't see the new birth of a new sector just every single day. So you're witnessing the birth of a new sector now, and you're probably not going to see another one again in your lifetime. This just doesn't happen every day, but we're right in the middle of this thing now. And as I mentioned already, it's not done. We're not at the beginning, we're kind of in the middle phase here, but there's a lot more to come, and it's growing at a very, very rapid pace, and there's a lot of momentum behind it. I'd like to comment on this quote here from the Harvard Business Review. And what's interesting about this is this right here where I underline it. It says, the rise of this sector is likely to reshape the future of capitalism. And this is dated November 2011. In 2011, it was likely. I think today in 2016, it's not likely anymore. It is reshaping. It is rewriting. This is changing everything. It's changing the way banks are thinking about this. It's changing the way nonprofits are looking at things. It's changing the way for-profit businesses are marketing their products and creating value for their customers. But millennials are looking for this, not only in terms of the price and the product that they pay for, but also in the fact that they're looking for employers to go work for. It's changing the way everybody's thinking about this. It's changing the dynamics between businesses and nonprofits and foundations and everything. So it's not likely anymore, it's happening. And we'll talk some more about that later in the presentation. But I just wanted to kind of start this conversation out with the whole point of what we're trying to really do here with this program, CCSI, is really make sure people understand what this is and why this is significant and it's important, and also kind of give some more specific information in terms of what does this sector entail. Because as I mentioned already, there's a lot to it, it's kind of changing, there's lots of different names that are kind of being thrown around, and we'll focus on these 4 that are in here for this conversation today. There's more than that, but these are the ones that seem to be the ones that are most popular, that kind of have more of that staying power and are doing some cool things in the industry. So this is our continuum. So what do we mean when we talk about social impact? So that might be a new term for some, or it might be a term that you've heard before but didn't really know the specifics of what it entailed. So what we're referring to when we talk about a social impact or social impact business is areas here in blue. So on this continuum, you'll see that we've got a nonprofit or charity here in green. We've got the traditional for-profit company here in yellow. And so when you look at this slide, the idea is to say, these are all these things they're all blue. They're all social impact business models. But in terms of the continuum of where they kind of fit on this will kind of be the point of this conversation. So when we're talking about a social enterprise business right here, which is a business that exists to solve social issue, they more kind of align on the continuum here on this side. They can be nonprofit or for-profit. I think there's a misnomer out there that a lot of people think, well, oh, that's just a nonprofit. Not necessarily. It can be either one. You'll see a lot more nonprofits going down this road. There's a lot of conversation in this community, but you've got nonprofits. There's one here in town called Silver Key that works with seniors. They are a nonprofit. They started a for-profit organization, more on this side, that does benefits. It's a social enterprise model, but it's a for-profit. So you can do both. When you kind of do this one click to the right here, in terms of a social business, this is a business that combines both a commercial and social goal. Typically when you're talking about a social enterprise, somebody has created this business model to solve some type of social issue, and that's why it exists. The social business model combines both of those. They have a mission, they have a goal, they have environmental, they have societal, but they also have the economic piece kind of plugged right into it. Again, that can be a nonprofit or for-profit, but more likely you're already seeing the businesses in this area are typically more of a for-profit nature. Then you come one click over here again in conscious capitalism. This is businesses that say that they have a higher purpose, that they're for-profits, they're there to make money, they typically have shareholders, and they need to make money for those shareholders. But they've realized, and I've got some research I'll show you here later, that talks about if you have a higher purpose with a higher mission, not only will you attract really good employees that stay there long, and they typically pay their employees more money than what the national average would be, or the marketplace would be for their businesses. But they're also going to have some really, really powerful brands. And so they've got a good message to customers, all of us, that buy from them. And so I'll show you that slide here in a moment. And some of those businesses are probably going to be some of the favorite ones that you have. So they are still for profit. They're there to make money, but they've recognized that if they have a business with a higher purpose and have more power, they can make more money and provide more impact to communities and to the environment. The last one over here is Benefit Corporation. And this is something that this can kind of be a little bit confusing because there's two pieces to this. There's something in Colorado, and there's something in 31 other states called a public benefit corporation. It's an actual legal structure. So when we're talking about everything on these slides here, in blue at least, this is the only one that has its own specific legal entity, its own specific designation. There's also a certification that goes with it. And so it can kind of be confusing for people. They've heard about a B corporation, which the B is for benefit, but they might get confused between it's a certification or it's an actual entity, and to make it even more confusing, most of them will do both. So they'll incorporate as a public benefit corporation as a legal structure, but then they'll also get the certification. So they'll kind of do both. But when you look at the continuum of what these businesses are, and again, these are for-profits. And again, I'll show you a list of some of them that you've probably heard of here in a moment. But when you're talking about what they do and how they work and kind of who's leading the different movements in this, there's a couple of different pieces that I think are important. From a social enterprise perspective, there is an organization called SEA, or Social Enterprise Alliance, the largest trade association in North America for social enterprise businesses. They're doing a lot of the work. They're doing a lot of different things within this. This is just a really good book that it's written by a man named Kevin Lynch, who is the past CEO of SEA. And this is just a fantastic book for anybody that is thinking about starting one, that already has one. There's just a lot of really good conversations about the different pieces of this. There's even a chapter in there that actually lays out a business plan for a social enterprise, because it's just a little bit different than you would start a normal business. And the best example I can give you is that for a social enterprise business, rather than kind of picking with your product line and starting there with the product or service you're going to offer, these folks typically start with, what's the social problem? What's the issue I want to solve? Then let me figure out what the product or service is going to be. But ultimately, I'm going to start with, what is a social issue that I'm trying to fix, and how am I going to create a program or service or product that will fix this, that will feed into that. Mohammed Yunus is the one kind of leading the social business movement. Mohammed Yunus is the founder of Grameen Bank. He's the inventor of microfinance. He won a Nobel Peace Prize a number of years ago. And so he's doing a lot of work throughout the world at this point. But he's really kind of saying, love social enterprise, love how this works, but this is just a little bit different because it combines these goals rather than just having that specific focus of the mission-driven business. There's mission incorporated in there, but it's kind of equal to the economic factors that have this business. Then you go to conscious capitalism. This is being led by John Mackey. John Mackey is the co-CEO of Whole Foods. And John Mackey and a bunch of his friends and colleagues that own large businesses have really kind of pulled together. This is the book that he wrote, but there's a nonprofit called Conscious Capitalism, and they have chapters throughout the United States. I think there's one up in Denver. And they do just a number of different things in terms of training people, businesses, individuals to kind of think more like a conscious capitalist where, yes, profit's important, but it's not profit for profit's sake. It's, you got to make money to pay your shareholders, but you've also got to have that higher purpose because that's going to bring people to work, you're going to sell more product, but it also gives your company meaning. And so they're very specific about that. The B Corp, this is a new book that just came out not too long ago. This talks about primarily the certification model that folks can go through. It's a very difficult certification process. There's about 200 points that are in there. On average, companies that score on this, the average score for them is about 80. You have to have, I believe it's a score of 90 to be certified. And then when you're talking about like Patagonia as an example, I'll talk more about them, their score is like 115. And they are a very, very, very progressive company. So it's hard. And what we've talked a lot about in other conversations is that this is fantastic. They're doing cool things. But this is like the Ferrari of certifications. So this is good in a lot of sense, but it's really hard to do. They've got about 1,800 certified businesses worldwide, but there's probably about 40,000 people that will go and just download the application and the criteria just to kind of use as a benchmark for their companies and also to use in strategic planning. So if you really want to kind of get some really specific, what does this even mean? What does it even look like to be a benefit corporation or social impact? They've done a really good job kind of outlining that. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of stuff, but just to kind of check it and look at it, it's just kind of useful to kind of have that as a resource. Always like to give examples, so nationally and locally, of what we're talking about, because again, this is something, like I said, that a lot of people kind of struggle with, because you have people that, really quickly, who's heard of social enterprise? Just quick show of hands. How about social businesses? Conscious capitalism? Okay. Public benefit corporation or certified B Corps? All right. And so and this is the response that we'll typically get because this stuff's so new. And this is where it can be confusing because you get people that, well, social enterprise and social business are the same thing, right? Conscious capitalism, I never heard of that. But isn't that the same thing as social enterprise? So this is where people really don't necessarily understand what the difference is. And what we're saying for all these models is that it's simply this. None of these are better or worse than any other. They all work depending upon what your vision is and what your structure will be and really what your business model is going to consist of. So we want to be able to provide a framework and education on any of these, but it just depends on what you want to do. It really just depends on how you want to set up your company. It really depends on what your mission is going to be. It's really going to depend perhaps even on the population that you serve. So it could make sense to have a nonprofit, could make sense to have a for-profit. A lot of this is just really what you call yourself and how you identify. But it's really, really key, and we'll come back to that in that other class called Telling Your Social Impact Story. Talk a little bit about that today. That's where it's so critical that you're telling the story the right way, because that's what's going to convey your meaning and message to the folks that you're serving and to the people that you're employing, as well as the consumer base that you're trying to get. So it's absolutely important that you get that right. And most people, unfortunately, get it wrong because it's harder to do than you think. So social enterprise. Has everybody heard of the company called Blue Star here locally? So Blue Star, I'm seeing a lot of head nodding. They are an electronic recycling manufacturer, and they employ individuals that are DD and IDD. So they employ people with disabilities. And what's cool about this business model is that, number one, they're putting a very difficult population back to work. Number two, they're keeping a lot of electronic components out of landfills, so it's a green job, and they're recycling that. But they're doing these things in a manner that is, this is a classic example of social enterprise. So they're making money to pay for their nonprofit mission of employing people with disabilities by creating a product and a service of recycling electronics that has a nice message in there, because you're keeping things in a landfill, you're actually recycling, you're providing a needed service to the community, and you're putting people back to work. They've been in operation now, I think, for like 5 or 6 years. They have 0% turnover. I challenge you to find any other industry that has 0% turnover in that length of time. So what a lot of social entrepreneurs and social enterprise businesses have figured out is that there's an untapped labor force within the disabled communities. So number one, it's the right thing to do, right? Number two, this is a very, very potentially lucrative business model by employing these people to come work for you, because they're typically going to give you 110%. Whether it's folks that have a developmental disability, whether it's folks with mental illness, whether it's folks that were previously incarcerated, at-risk youth, I mean, take your pick. There's a number of businesses that do this. And from a social enterprise standpoint, there's different types of social enterprise businesses. We're not going to kind of get into that today. But the majority of them, I think it's like 60 or 70%, are what we would call a job-creating social enterprise. So a business that's trying to put to work some type of disenfranchised population and help them out through the business model. And it has to link typically to their product as well. Typically the definition of when you're talking about a social enterprise, it has to do with earned income or earned revenue is what they'll talk about. So as a nonprofit, typically in terms of your funding model, you're going to get funding from donations, grants, or the government. That's going to pay for your budget. And so if you had, and the rule of thumb is that if you're a social enterprise and you're a nonprofit in this category over here, at least 60% of your income needs to be from other revenue sources that do not include the one I just mentioned. So you actually need to have a business model. So if you have donations and grants and government funding, that doesn't count, because you're a traditional nonprofit. A social enterprise is really going to say, yeah, we have this nonprofit mission, but we're actually going to build a business model and we're going to sell a product or service, and we're going to create more impact for our people that we're trying to serve by generating sales and revenue. And at least 60% of that would have to come from the free market. So, good question. So moving on to social business, Mountain Equipment Recyclers. Has anybody heard of them? They're down on Tejon Street. So they're a consignment model. They started their company because the owner wanted to help military veterans who were returning home from the war. And so Mike Mazzola is his name. So Mike said, I'm a real estate guy. I don't know what to do. I want to get involved. I'm not an expert in any of this, but I know how to run a business. So I'm going to create an outdoor gear store where he'll take high-end outdoor gear. You would give it to him. He puts it in his store. He sells it. He gives you money, and he takes a cut of his and he donates it. If you want to donate your clothing to him, he'll take 100% of that, or 10%, whatever you want, and donate that. I know right now he's doing more things with kind of the outdoors and outdoor nonprofits and doing more things with them. But the model is the same, of just, I'm going to create a store, I'm going to create this concept where I'm generating revenue to keep the store open and operational. But the whole point of the store is to help people build within our community, give them money to help them build more things for their mission. So they're directly funding nonprofits. And you'll see a lot of those social businesses that'll do that. Some of them might not necessarily be directly involved in putting people back to work or employing them, but they'll give money to that type of nonprofit or even social enterprise that is doing it. And so through a retail consignment model, they're generating revenue that goes back into the community. Dannon, which is a well-known international company from a social business aspect, they're trying to create product and services mostly for kids, where it's yogurt products primarily for kids that are not getting a lot of nutrition, so they can get a lot of nutrients kind of packed into a cup. They give those out for free or at a reduced rate kind of throughout the world, as another example. Whole Foods, what they'll tell you, and John Mackey will tell you, is that, and this is a really good example of how this stuff works, because Whole Foods is expensive, right? But they're growing. I think Sprouts and Trader Joe's are going to give them a run for their money. But their whole thing is just, look, I'm going to give you a better product. I'm going to give you a healthier product. And typically, in terms of growing it, because we're talking about farmers, we're going to grow ethically, responsibly, and grow it sustainably. And you're going to pay more for that. That's the business model, which 15 years ago, people said, no way. I'm going to go get the cheapest product there is because it's cheap. We all kind of know now that cheap isn't necessarily good for our bodies or for the environment or for the workers. So they pay their employees really, really well. They pay the farmers really, really well. They give them longer contracts so they can farm sustainably and ethically. If you're worried about a contract changing every year, you're going to cut corners to maximize profit. If you get a contract for 15 years, you can send your kids to school. You're not going to worry. You're going to give a better product because that company's backing you and has told you, make sure you deliver the best. So their whole thing is, and John Mackey will tell you, yeah, I know I'm a grocer, I'm selling groceries, but that's not what I do. I'm not a grocer. It's not the business that we're in. The business that we're in, our higher purpose, is we want to alleviate poverty in third world countries. And we're doing that by partnering and contracting with these different farmers and families to work for Whole Foods to give us a good product, but in doing so to pay them higher wages so they can pull themselves out of poverty. And they just happen to use a grocery store as that model and that vehicle to do that. So that's the example of conscious capitalism. New Belgium falls actually in both these categories. They're a certified B Corporation, but New Belgium, you know, up the street here in Fort Collins, they're doing some good things, not only from a community standpoint, but also their employees. So they're 100% employee owned. A lot of businesses are doing this, or thinking about doing this. And 100% employee owned. They donate, I think it's, I can't remember the dollar amount, but there's a good chunk of their profits back to the community for social and environmental work. People just love the product because it's a good product, but they also like what they stand for. So they're kind of hitting on all cylinders in terms of what they do. And so they want to create more value by selling their product and doing more good in their community and more good for their employees. So that's kind of how their higher purpose, their higher mission of what they do is. And then when you get to Benefit Corporation, these are companies that really positively believe in impacting everything. So it's society, it's workers, it's everything, very similar to conscious capitalism, except that, as I mentioned, they've got a specific designation. So they've got a certified B Corporation model, and they've also got the public benefit model that is throughout lots of states. And Colorado has one of them. So in 2013, this model, this legal entity was legalized here in Colorado. So it's very, very new. And again, like I said, not a lot of people have even heard of it. So they even know this is an option if they're going to open a company or start a company. So just kind of diving in a little bit to social enterprise, as I mentioned, this is a business that exists to solve a social issue. This is some numbers from the standpoint of a social enterprise that does this job creation that I kind of mentioned to you about. So this nice little infographic kind of shows you a couple of different things. So at the top here, I don't know if you can read the bottom part, but 25% of folks who are entering, and this is a national survey that was done by a company called REDF, R-E-D-F. Their foundation out of California does a lot of good stuff about social enterprise creating jobs. 25% never had a job when they entered the programs throughout the nation. Aspen Point was actually included in the survey many years ago. 85% didn't have stable housing the year prior, and 71% of these folks had monthly income that came, and 25% for work. So when you look at just kind of who these people are, these are folks that are disabled, these are people that are impoverished, these are folks that don't have access to a lot of the services or people, and they're looking for work. And work is a very, very powerful thing because it gives you money, it gives you that dollar, but it also gives you purpose, it gives you pride in terms of what you can do. There's been research that's shown that, money's great if you want to go to work. If you go volunteer, it does a lot of the same types of things. But for these social entrepreneurs, these are the things that they're trying to do. So from a benefit standpoint, they're going to offer training. So just like Aspen Point over here, let's train you on food service industry, because there's a continuum of jobs you can get there. You can go work for minimum wage and go work for McDonald's. You can go and be an executive chef if you get really, really good and potentially work for the Broadmoor. And there's all these jobs in between. But let's train you on a number of these different things. Let's make sure that from a retention standpoint that we're giving you those soft skills so you don't pop off at your supervisor. You're learning to work well with others. You're learning new skills and coping mechanisms to be successful on the work site. Being self-sufficient in the workplace, and then also life stability. This one is a big one because typically a lot of these social entrepreneurs will partner with other agencies. So yeah, you might come here to learn how to do food training, but I'm going to plug you into a substance abuse counselor over here at this nonprofit. And I'm going to partner with this other agency to help get you housing. And I'm going to partner with the justice system because you might be on parole. And they're going to work with those agencies to make sure that the job comes first, but everything else will be supportive. So helping them find a lot of that stability that goes with this. And then interestingly enough, here's the social enterprise benefit for society. For every dollar that a social enterprise spends has a return on investment to all of us of $2.23. So the research is showing, and this is probably really conservative to be quite honest with you, There's other research I've seen that's 7 to 8 times for every dollar. When you're talking about, this is a worthy cause. I'm gonna donate money. I'm gonna go volunteer time. People will still absolutely do this, but if you have a choice, and we all have choices that we make every single day, and again, using a social enterprise cafe as an example, we all eat every day. So you can go buy from a food chain. A majority of that money is going to leave the community because if they're franchised, their headquarters are somewhere else. And we talked, and SBDC talks about that a lot already. Buy local, support local small business. So yes, we want to do that. But in addition to that, if you buy from a local small business, which is going to be a social enterprise, and buy from that social enterprise who's probably trying to help somebody who's homeless, somebody who has a behavioral health issue, or an at-risk kid, or whoever it is, you're investing in your community by buying a sandwich, of which you're going to buy anyways. So that's really kind of the business proposition that people are going with, is that if you hit the mark right, where there's a product or service you're selling that people are going to buy anyways, tell them, buy from me. Tom's shoes is the same thing. You all got to buy shoes. Buy a pair of Tom's for you, and then we're going to give a pair away to somebody who's in need. And there's a lot of these one-for-one models that are popping up out there. But what's just interesting about it is that you're not asking somebody to spend typically, this is another expense outside of your budget. It's the same thing with the federal government. And we get into that conversation of, I think there's opportunity for federal contracts. I think there's opportunity for sole source. I think there's opportunity for people to say, if I'm a social enterprise and I'm certified, then I can have an opportunity to bid on something that other people can't. So I think there's opportunity for government to kind of enter in and that piece of it. So, and then when you look at this right here, this is there for every dollar that a social enterprise spend, it saves taxpayers $1.31. This is the first time we've seen some of this research, and I think that's going to continue to go up as this becomes more of a model, a business model, and more people are doing this and creating more impact. You're going to see more cost savings for everybody across the board. And again, to your point, this is a good conversation for folks to have, whether you're Democrat or Republican. The bottom line is, let's put people back to work. We're not going to raise taxes. We are, through the free market, going to go out there and help people out, but we're going to do it by creating more business, creating more small business, and through free enterprise, create more value for everybody. And you're essentially voting every time, but you're voting with your wallet in the sense of where you show up and who you support and who you go through. And as some of the research I'll show you in a little bit too is going to show you that there are some companies that are making significant amounts of money because of their mission. Now, they're not just doing cause marketing and just saying, hey, here's what I'm doing, this is cool. They believe it. It's in the DNA of the founders, it's in the DNA of every single employee. And we're going to talk about that too today, the difference between social impact businesses and corporate social responsibility. There's a big difference. So conscious capitalism, I wanted to give you some more examples of, these are folks that were actually cited in some research that Harvard did. And I'll get to that research in a little bit, but this is really what they talk about with their kind of model of having that higher purpose. They want to have stakeholder investment. So from all of us, we would buy a product or service from them, from these people, because it's a better product. We like what they do. They create value. I mean, there's lots of reasons. From a leadership perspective, as I mentioned, they're leading by example. They're leading when it comes down to the culture of their business will permeate throughout. Some of these companies are companies that people just, I'd love to go work there, right? This is a company that I value, that I enjoy their product or service, But again, they do it just a little bit different. The example I always like to use is Starbucks, because people have a love-hate relationship with Starbucks. But when you look at the positive of what they do, again, they're doing a lot of same thing similar to what Whole Foods is doing in terms of their organic fair trade coffee. They're helping to support farmers. They're trying to provide stability in those marketplaces. They also take care of their employees. I mean, they give benefits for part-time employees. They have a deal with ASU where you can go get your MBA online. They'll pay for it. I mean, so it's things like that make you more of a conscious capitalist or more of this public benefit corporation. So whether you like their product or not so much as, because again, we don't like everybody on there, but they're trying to do some innovative things and trying to be more creative with what they do. And they're usually typically really good places to work. So this is just some of them from this research that popped up. And then going on to Benefit Corporation. So I had the opportunity to go meet with Patagonia about a month ago and sit down and talk to them because we want to pull them into a partnership with BBB as one organization. We're going to talk to others. But I love their mission statement here because this says everything about, and this is just the perfect example of an organization that does this. Our mission is to build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, Use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. They've been doing this since 1973. Their products are extremely expensive. They're very, very expensive. But what they'll tell you is, don't buy a new jacket every year. Buy one jacket for 10 years, and when it breaks, bring it in, we'll fix it. And oh, by the way, when you're done with it, we'll recycle it. So they've done a whole lot of really kind of innovative things, and I brought this document for folks to look at. This is their report. If you're a certified public benefit company, you've got to do one of these for B Labs. So this is their report. And so this kind of talks about just kind of the impact they've had in their community, the impact they've had in their environment. It goes through all the programs. They're doing some amazing things. I can tell you right now that it's expensive to print this document. It's expensive to do these programs. That's why you're going to pay more for the jacket, because they're doing a lot more for the environment and they're doing a lot of things for society. One of the key pieces for this that I like to point out to folks is this right here. They call themselves the responsible company. They don't call themselves a sustainable company. The founder, Yvon Chouinard, will tell you that we're not sustainable. Nobody's sustainable. So I don't use that word. Once we get to be truly a sustainable company, then I'll call ourselves that. We're a responsible company. We're working on sustainability, but nobody really is. A sustainable company is one that takes from the environment, from people, from society, from whatever they take for their business, they give back and replenish. And once you're doing that, your giving and taking is equal, then you're truly sustainable. And we're not there yet. We're working on it. So this is just an example, a really good example of what these companies typically embody. And then the other thing that's really kind of interesting about this is that this is a good example of a public benefit corporation. So they were the first public benefit corporation in California. And the reason that they signed up for this is because Yvon was getting ready to retire. And Yvon knew that if he retired, because he was just a for-profit company, and here's how this works for for-profit companies, is that you have to maximize profit. That's your goal. Maximize profit for your shareholders. That's what you got to do. And if you don't do that, you can get sued. And so that's where you've got a lot of these innovative companies that have good boards of directors that are okay. We're okay with you investing in the environment. We're okay with you investing in that. That's not the norm. The public benefit corporation gives people the ability to spend money on a social or environmental initiative. So that's the difference. So now from a law perspective, you have a company that will legally let you do this, because otherwise you have to have a really understanding board of directors, right, and shareholders. But what he knew was that if he retired, then theoretically somebody could sell Patagonia and they could just do whatever they wanted with it. And most likely somebody that would buy Patagonia would say, you know what, I want to keep that little that logo, that brand, and I'm going to stop doing all these initiatives because we'll make more money. And so he knew that if he retired without that, then that's not the legacy he wanted to leave. So before he retired, he signed up for this because it writes in the law, it writes into the company charter, the mission of Patagonia that goes along with its for-profit mission of making money. So they're both in there. So now if it's sold, whoever buys it can make money off the product, but they have to continue the social and environmental activities that go with it. So that's kind of a good example of why you would potentially, form a public benefit corporation. And again, here's the other thing I'll throw out there. This is the first generation. I think there'll be more. And I don't think this is quite it yet anyways. It's good. This is good stuff, but I don't think we're done seeing these new corporate structures. I think there'll be more. The mission of what you do in your business model have to intersect. You can't just say, I'm going to go help veterans and I'm going to sell a power bar. I mean, if you can get that to make sense, great, but it's got to work. And this, again, is a really good example of that because the founder, Yvon, will say, we didn't start out with this idea of saving the environment. That's not where we started. He started out as a blacksmith, basically, making mountain climbing equipment. And when the mountain climbing equipment wasn't making enough money, he's like, I'm going to sell T-shirts and shorts. And so they started to do that, to make money so they could go surfing and rock climbing and have fun. That's why they started this company. He's like, I'll be honest with you. But what they found when they started making T-shirts is that that's one of the most dirty things you can produce from a retail standpoint. And the entire garment industry is a mess. And so when he realized that, I'm trying to sell these shirts and these shorts to make money so that we can go have fun in the environment and the outdoors, as a business person, I'm actually destroying the thing that I love the most. And so I can't do that. So why would I destroy the rock? Why would I destroy the forest? That's what I want to do. but by my business, I'm actually killing it. So hold on, let's rethink this. That's how they got started. So in order to promote the outdoors of buy jackets and go climbing, which is what their company is, they're also saying, look, if we're going to enjoy this, and I don't want to be the one that's actually destroying it because I'm undermining, who I am as an individual, but also the product, the business model itself would be destroyed theoretically if more and more of this stuff happened. So that's how they got into this stuff, of wanting to preserve it. And so, organic cotton is a good conversation for them. It cost them a whole lot of money to set that up. Now organic cotton is fairly mainstream for the most part. That was extraordinarily difficult. It took them a lot of time and a lot of money to do that, but they're making money on that. And now it's easier for entry for other businesses to do the same. So they're leading the way. And I think that's where you get into this, use business to inspire and implement solutions. That's what they're trying to do. And I think that's quintessential to what you'll see from anybody in the sector, using business as the tool to solve these issues. Because let's be honest, is the government going to do this? And I'm not picking on the government, but that's not what they do. That's not, we got to fill potholes, right? And is it going to be nonprofits? I'm a nonprofit. Not to speak ill of nonprofits at all. We don't have the funding. We don't have the money. And that's really unfair because that's typically the sector that's supposed to be out there solving these issues. And they've been given this unfair, I think, nomenclature of go solve all these problems that are created, but we're not going to give you the tools and we're not going to give you the resources. That makes no sense to me. So really, who's going to solve these issues? It's going to be an entrepreneur. Whether they're a social entrepreneur or an entrepreneur, they're going to be the ones that are solving these issues because they have access to the resources. They have the business model. Whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit, my point is today, it doesn't matter anymore. Just go out there and solve something, but you're using business as a force for good, not specifically just for gain. It's a very different kind of thinking. So relevance of the sector. I want to give you guys some data of, here we are kind of telling you this is interesting and this is cool, but that's all nice. Let's talk about the facts and let's talk about why this is important. The number one piece that I tell businesses in Colorado Springs from a BBB perspective, well, Jonathan, why are you telling us this? It's like, let me explain to you how this is going. I'm not telling you this is for everybody. I'm not saying this is going to be the model for everyone, everywhere, but you should pay attention to this because there's some really interesting things that we're seeing, some really interesting data that's popping out of this. From a business perspective, people need to pay attention to this because from a future workforce, from a product and a profitability standpoint, there's some changes, there's some shifts that are going on here. The rules are being rewritten. So this first one right here is interesting. Paying more for a product or service. So when we're talking about what type of product or service, we kind of use this. So brands that are associated with the cause. So first of all, more than 9 in 10 millennials would switch. They want to go and work for these places. And I love this quote up here where it says, millennials say they're more prepared to make personal sacrifices to make an impact on issues that they care about. Meaning, typically, are you going to take a pay cut to work for a responsible company? From a millennial standpoint, 62% said yes. 56% of the average Americans said yes. They take a pay cut to go work for a company with a higher purpose. I'm not just talking about nonprofits, because they do that for sure, absolutely. We're talking about for-profit companies typically. They will go take less money, but they'll also pay more for a product. So millennials, 70% say they would. The US average is 66%. Good example, that's going to be Whole Foods, right? It's expensive. Patagonia, it's expensive. You could even make the comment that Starbucks could be included in there. $5 for a cup of coffee, it's like, really? They're doing quite well. So it's this notion of what are you doing for my community? What are you doing for your employees? What's your brand represent? What do you do? How does this work? We'll pay more, we'll share products, and we'll take a pay cut to work for some of these companies. And again, this is interesting data because this is not just millennials. They're highlighted on here, but that you can see the rest of the stuff from a US average. So this is stuff that's really interesting. The other research that's not on here, but it talks about people that will switch from a favorite brand to a new one that they've never tried before with a cause, 90%. 90% of people will switch to a new brand if it's associated with a cause. If it gives back to their community, if it provides value locally, they will change. And more than likely will stay there, even if it's more expensive sometimes. Doesn't have to be, but even if it is, people will change. So this stuff is not, it's being changed. When you talk about what's being taught even in business schools now, you can go get an MBA and have a traditional program. There are other MBA programs that are popping up in Ivy League schools. So I think New York University has one, I think Yale has one, I think Columbia. A couple of them have these, I think they're called like a sustainable MBA. And you can go get a degree. You can get a degree in social enterprise now. But you can go and get these degrees that teach these different types of methodologies, and specifically from an MBA program, doing a very different approach to this that talks more about how this all works, where you can go get a degree in this stuff now. So it's all kind of changing. When you look at the impact of millennials on social business, again, this kind of gets into prioritizing cause products. So again, most likely to switch brands, same thing, 95 versus the 85% for the US average. So 95% of millennials will switch, 85% of everybody else will switch.
The 4 things you need to know, we mentioned a little bit earlier, and I kind of led into that these 4 things are what we're going to be presenting in the next 4 workshops in the series for CCSI. So first, choosing your legal entity. The SBDC provided a lot of information to this program, and working with the BBB under it, providing the fundamentals for business success. And a lot of them, when you start up, are just this: choosing your legal entity, understanding your finances, bookkeeping, telling your story, being able to give your pitch, right? You hear about all of this as you're starting your business, but under CCSI, there's some other things you need to know. And Jonathan mentioned a little bit about that earlier. So under starting a business, we always talk about S corporations, LLCs, sole proprietors. But in the social impact world, under social enterprise, what we're going to be talking about in this class is learning about public benefit corporations, C Corps, S Corps, how the nonprofits fit in, and ESOPs. Which one might be the right for you, because they all have different reporting structures. As you saw, Patagonia being a B Corp produces that book. There's different things you need to do reporting-wise when you set up your legal structure. So we'll also be talking about formation documents, amendments, your board of directors, year-end financial statements, year-over SROI, and all of the things that fall under the legal entity that you create. And this class will be taught by Jeff. I believe you're part of this conversation next week. Jeff is a practitioner. He owns Common Cause Catering, if you didn't know that. So Jeff is here to provide the additional story that goes along with the legal entity formation. So Joanne Schmidt's an attorney that works for SBDC as a volunteer and the Better Business Bureau will be teaching that portion. And Jeff will be telling the story that adds that extra twist on actually how you do it and what does it mean as a business owner. The next class after that is social impact bookkeeping and finance. So everybody loves finances and bookkeeping and numbers, I'm sure, right? Everybody in this room. If you're anything like, well, we've got one. For the rest of us, bookkeeping and understanding how to do your books, your cash flow and everything is very important from the very start of creating your business. But there's some other aspects of that as well when you're running a social enterprise. So we want to teach you about those aspects from the very beginning so that you're doing it right from the start, because it's too late later on. And Jeff is probably shaking his head yes, that's why he did it from the beginning as well. So how bookkeeping, accounting, and finance principles are critical to the success, and how you need to establish yourself at the very beginning with your solid business plan, and then really keeping track of your SROI and that triple bottom line we talked about at the very beginning. So those are our first 2 classes, and mentioned they're really based off of the fundamentals of a business, but then we're adding on that social impact portion to it. The next class is Making Meaning with Metrics, and Stacy is going to talk about that next.
So we'll go into more detail on this here in a second, but I'm just here to tell you numbers can be fun. They're your friend, and they're really, really important when you're looking at a social impact business. There's a lot of different ways to gather those numbers, and there's a lot of things that you really want to think through on the front end. And so we'll kind of ask some questions to get you thinking about what you want that to look like when you're telling other people what you're doing, and how that then impacts telling your story. So Jonathan leads that.
So this class is going to be really, this is the important one. As I mentioned before, a lot of people get this one wrong. They get this wrong because they're not talking about why it's important what they do. They'll just kind of tell you, here's what we're doing. And it's got to be linked to, well, what's the why? You know, why is this important? Why do we need this? If you are selling your story the right way, you'll get everybody in the community to become really a fan. Because a lot of times what you'll see is you'll see companies that will say, well, I focus on this segment. Or if or whoever you're talking to says, that's really great that you're working, it's a Blue Star. That's really, really great that you're working with people that are developmentally disabled. I'm glad you're doing it. I don't have to worry about it, right? And they step away. That's not what you want to be able to have. If you're showing the importance of whatever that you're selling, whatever you're doing, everybody in the community should be involved. Everybody should want to make sure that they're a part of that. So it's not just about giving somebody that has a developmental disability a job. It's about creating an opportunity for other folks with these disabilities that are going to be able to go to work, that are going to provide a good job, provide a good service, and the more of them you get plugged into the workforce, that's not only going to help them in terms of getting well and getting healthy, but in terms of the benefits that they might receive from the government in terms of that. A lot of people want to get off of that, but they don't have the opportunity to do that. So there's more value to more people. So how do you have a mission and vision statement, defining your purpose, telling your story, conveying the social impact through your business story, and learning your elevator pitch? You should be able to tell this in 1 minute or less. Like any elevator story, these are even more hard because you've got a couple different factors. And so Ekta mentioned before the triple bottom line, people, profit, and planet. I also refer to it as mission, margin, and community benefit, community impact. How do you talk about all three of those things in 1 minute or less and convey the notion of, I'm really, really excited? And basically, if you get it right, it's, I'm going to go do this in 1 minute or less, and I'm ready to save the world. What do I need to do? Go buy a sandwich. That's it? Yeah, go buy a sandwich from a social enterprise. I can do that. So how are you able to kind of convey that and really make sure that you're passionate and you're hitting the mark on all those things? So we're going to spend a whole class just talking about how this is going to work, because it's very, very important. So the future of the fourth sector, this is some of the reference, or the research I was referencing earlier. This is on the conscious capitalists. And again, this is hard to read, I think, in this room. Plus, you guys are way in the back over there. So, but this, I'll read it to you too, is this shows a couple of things. So this is the book. I'm not sure about the title. It's called Firms of Endearment. You gotta love that, right? This is from Harvard. So they're having some fun. But what they did is they looked at those conscious capitalist companies that I had in the other slide, and they researched them, and they wanted to see how they compared against, we've got the S&P down here at the bottom, Jim Collins, Good to Great Companies. We've all read Jim Collins stuff, right? Yep. And then you've got the international ones, and then you've got the US. So these are the ones in red that we'll pay attention to. So after 3 years on this first part, you see the S&P is at 57%, Good to Great Companies are 222%. So we all know Jim Collins, his companies are outperforming the market. The international, or the firms of endearment companies, are only 83%. So the good news is after 3 years, 83, they're still outperforming the rest of the market. But here's where it gets really, really interesting. So again, we'll just look at the Good to Great Company, because we already know they're better than the market. So 222, after 5 years at 158, 10 years, 176, 15 years, 263%. That's phenomenal. That's incredible, right? Here's what happens with these things right here, and I don't think you can read them. So 83 is 3 years. After 5 years at 151. At 10 years, they're at 410%. At 15 years, they're at 1,681% in terms of how they're outperforming the market. And so you can see that. They're outperforming the S&P by 14 times, and they're outperforming the Good to Great Companies by 6 times over a period of 15 years. Now here's a caveat to this, and this is what I'll tell people, is that, yeah, 15 years, that's a long time, right? The only reason I think that this is 15 years is simply because of the fact that the price to enter the marketplace is so high right now, because they're inventing the marketplace, they're building these industries. So if you're Patagonia and you want to sell an organic t-shirt, you're not going to make money in the first 3 to 5 years probably, because you're starting from scratch. But now what I would hope to see, they do this research again, I hope that this number at the 3 and the 5 year mark increase more, because the barrier to entry has been reduced. There's more people doing it, which means it's easier for you to outsource that cotton tee if you wanted to start your own company, rather than you having to go and make it. But even so, what's interesting is the fact that when you get to 1,681% in terms of where they're at as far as market performance, this is very, very interesting, because typically what you'll hear from people is that, well, that's great that you're going to do good, that's awesome, but you're not going to make any money doing that. That's not true. I'm going to pay my employees more, and I'm going to double the contracts from farmers in third world countries. I'm going to pay them double the amount anybody else does in the industry. Don't do that. You're not going to make any money. That's not true. So this is very much, like I said, this is rewriting the way people are thinking about doing business. Now, it doesn't mean that if you just go out there and do good, you're going to make money. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's a very dangerous assumption. These are very difficult businesses to run, because, again, when you're talking about Running a business, you have to make money. You have a nonprofit, you want to have a mission. You combine those two, and then you add a third one, which are bottom line. That's very, very difficult to combine all of those. Because there'll be times when your mission and your margin absolutely conflict with one another. And I'll give you a perfect example. One of the conversations we had with our board about the cafe over here was, Jonathan, you guys need to make more money. Okay. What would you like us to do? I don't know. What would you like to do? What does a normal restaurant do? Well, they sell alcohol. Well, should we sell alcohol? Absolutely not. Well, why not? Because half the people that are in there have substance abuse issues. That's our mission. I could make more money by selling alcohol, but that defeats the mission of what we're trying to accomplish. All right, well, the profit is fine, right? So these are the conversations that are going to happen. And that was a 4-month conversation, and it was a lot of this, but that's what happens. And so they're very difficult to run. But again, there's research that's coming out now that's showing, it's very encouraging. And if you ever really want to look at what, not just from an industry standpoint, but from a community and government standpoint, go look at the stuff in the UK. They got tons of information, lots of research, lots of data. They're doing a lot of interesting and cool things over there. So they're a good kind of litmus test to see, will this work here? Or when this does kind of get to that point, what will it kind of look like? We'll end up doing a lot of our own things, but the research is very encouraging. Talking about what's important is measuring your metrics. Stacey's going to cover some more of that.
So really quickly, how many of you all consider yourselves investors? You've got a 401k, you like the stock market, day trader by night, whatever the case may be. So if you had a chance to make a 1,600% return, you'd probably sign up for that, right? That makes sense to you as an investor. So what if we started telling people what the social return on investment was? This is something that I guarantee you there are organizations across this country that are doing amazing things and sitting on a mound of data that could be helping them tell their story in a much more meaningful way. And so what we want to do with the SROI movement and the class that I spoke of earlier, the making meaning out of metrics, that's what I want to start. I want to make sure that people are being purposeful in how they gather data. I want to make sure that people are thinking about how they tell their story based on the data they're gathering. And I also want people to be thinking about, if it didn't have the impact that they expected, is this moving in the right direction? A really good business model asks itself, am I doing what I set out to do? Am I doing what was intended? And I think sometimes when we throw a mission in there, we get a little confused about just beating down the door, and maybe the door moved and you're just hitting your head on a wall. So I think that there's some really important questions that we can ask ourselves based on looking at numbers. So just a really quick example, I would argue everyone's an investor. Every time you buy a sandwich, every time you buy a shirt, every time you buy a pair of shoes, which for me is a lot, I love shoes, you are an investor. You are telling people this is where I want to spend my money, and I value whatever you're doing with it. So if you got that product out of China, if you got it next door and your veteran neighbor made it, that is how you're telling people that is what you value, whether you're thinking about it or not. So based on the 4 different categories that Jonathan shared, I've kind of started to come up with a model. Lisa's gonna help me, and we've got some really great folks on board to kind of start to talk about what this could look like for the sector. But I've got 4 categories. They're the same categories under each of these. You've got health, you've got human service, you've got green, and then you've got consumerism. We'll talk about that one in a second. But those are kind of the categories when I think about different ways to make impact. That's really the lanes that you see people kind of fall into. I'm sure there's some that I've missed. Please email me if I have, or come talk to me afterwards, because I know we're missing some, but we're just starting to really think about how we can organize this for the social impact sector. But the example I like to share is, let's say you have a company in front of you, you as the investor, and you have an option for 2 different types of social impact businesses. There is no judgment on these. There is just a difference in how the information is portrayed. So your first opportunity is to invest in 500 Band-Aids that are going to help 500 people cover a wound. That's going to keep them from getting infected. That could cause a lot more medical bills. It's visible, you can see it, it's immediate. You know that you had impact on 500 people, the volume of it. 500 people, you impacted 500 people's lives. That's amazing. You have another opportunity over here that's getting 5 people long-term health care, intensive long-term health care. That's a little harder to see, right? You don't know what the impact is on getting someone intensive health care for a year, 5 years from now, until you measure it. We don't have that data right now. We're not gathering that data. And so if you're looking at it from, when you look at it as an investor, you look at it in terms of risk profile, right? Some people just like to take risks more than others. I want a small return, I want a large return. I want to develop something in terms of an impact profile. And so the 500 Band-Aids is immediate. You have investors that are going to love that idea because they can see it. You're going to have other investors that are super excited about those 5 people getting medical health care because 5 years down the road, they're working and they're not sitting in a hospital. And 20 years down the road, their kid graduated from high school because they weren't in the hospital with mom or dad. And 50 years down that road, when that kid had higher earnings because they graduated high school, that made an impact. And it can be generational in a lot of cases in terms of what some of these companies are doing. And so as we start to measure that sector, I don't want to pit social impact businesses against each other. I just want to create an opportunity where you, as an investor, have the transparency into where you want your money to go and how you want that return to come back to you and to your community. So those are the conversations we're going to be having.
So just to wrap this up, and then if there's more questions, I'd be happy to take those. Some of the conversation is just, for the future. What are we doing for the future? What are the things that we want to be aware of? One of the pieces of the conversation in terms of the future is going to be, what's the BBB going to be doing? So BBB has actually, in their strategic plan for the next 3 years, has stated as one of their 3 goals that they want to be a leader in the social impact area, the social impact field. And they want to be a leader by providing a couple of things. One, provide a framework for businesses. So what will potentially, this is a sample only, this is not what it will be, but something along this line of an accredited conscious business. So this is our existing one, our 8 standards of trust. This is the logo that you would get. You're an accredited business. This is what we kind of do now, but adding something else to this. And some of you have heard this before, but I think it's important because what we want to do is we want to do 2 things. Again, as I mentioned, provide some of these standards for businesses. If you're going to call yourself one, what does that look like? What does that mean? And these are just examples. But then the other piece of it is really making sure that providing a vehicle and a way for consumers to become educated on this so that people are not getting taken advantage of, or people aren't using this as a method to make more money. And being able to distinguish between a true social impact company and cause marketing. And where's that money going to go? How is it being used? How are you reporting that out? You got to publish this. We're going to re-vet you once a year, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just going to be more of that conversation and more of some of the things that we'll be involved with. And again, you'll hear more about that here in our community because this is going to be a place where we probably pilot some of this stuff out. So this is a big conversation. There's a lot more to come, but we're right in the middle of all this. Colorado Springs is, and it's an exciting time. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of things for all of us to kind of work together on as a community. Ultimately, I think Colorado Springs can be one of the national leaders in the marketplace on this right now. And so that's one of the goals we have with this program is to provide some of that. So whether we're helping people have conversations, connecting the dots, whether we're launching businesses, et cetera, we want to be able to be helpful in all those different areas and partner with a lot of people in the community to do this. So with that, unless there's any other comments the 2 of you have. Yep.
So if I can throw my pitch in really quickly associated with that. This is definitely our pilot. These are the 2016 classes that we wanted to roll so we can make 2017 amazing. One of the ways you could really help us with that is you're going to get a survey follow-up today. Please make sure you signed in with Gina, who's our Director of Marketing at the BBB. Please make sure we have your email address. Please give us feedback. And all feedback is incredibly welcome because that's what's going to make that next class very important and very relevant to the people that are attending. So these pilot classes, that feedback is very, very crucial to what those will look like, how often we need to offer those. So if this one needs to be taught monthly, maybe it needs to be taught every 2 weeks. We don't know what the demand and what the need is right now. So please give us that feedback on that survey. That would help us a ton. And we'd appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for the first inaugural class of all this. I appreciate you coming today. Thank you so much.
Okay.